Like all good tales, your data story will be filled with characters, questions, challenges, conflict, and hopefully a resolution. The trick is to avoid the conflict, overcome the challenges, and answer the questions. That's what this course is all about. Here's how we'll do it. First, you'll learn how to analyze data for bias and credibility. This is very important because even the most sound data can be skewed or misinterpreted. Then we'll learn about the importance of being good and bad. Yep, just like when we were kids. But in this case, we'll be exploring good data sources and learning how to steer clear of their nemesis, bad data. After that, we'll learn more about the world of data ethics, privacy, and access. As more and more data becomes available and the algorithms we create to use this data become more complex and sophisticated, new issues keep popping up. We need to ask questions like, who owns all this data? How much control do we have over the privacy of data? Can we use and reuse data however we want to? As a data analyst, it's important to understand data ethics and privacy because in your work, you'll make a lot of judgment calls on the correct use and application of data. I'm excited to walk you through some of the questions, answers, risks, and rewards involved. Let's open up the first chapter of this data story in our next video. Let's kick things off by traveling back in time. Well, in our minds at least. My real time machine's in the shop. Imagine you're back in middle school and you've entered a project for the science fair. You worked hard for weeks perfecting every element and they're about to announce the winners. You close your eyes, take a deep breath, and you hear them call your name. For second place. Bummer. You really wanted that first place trophy, but hey, you'll take the ribbon for recognition. The next day, you learn the judge was the winner's uncle. How is that fair? Can he really be expected to choose a winner fairly when his own family member is one of the contestants? He's probably biased. Well, maybe his niece deserved to win, and maybe not. But the point is, it's very easy to make a case for bias in that scenario. Now, this is a super simple example, but the truth is, we run into bias all the time in everyday life. Our brains are biologically designed to streamline thinking and make quick judgments. Bias has evolved to become a preference in favor of or against a person, group of people, or thing, and it can be conscious or subconscious. The good news is, once we know and accept that we have bias, we can start to recognize our own patterns of thinking and learn how to manage it. It's important to know that bias can also find its way into the world of data. Data bias is a type of error that systematically skews results in a certain direction. Maybe the questions on a survey had a particular slant to influence answers, or maybe the sample group wasn't truly representative of the population being studied. For example, if you're going to take the median age of the US patient population with health insurance, you wouldn't just use a sample of Medicare patients who are 65 and older. Bias can also happen if a sample group lacks inclusivity. For example, people with disabilities tend to be underidentified, underrepresented, or excluded in mainstream health research. The way you collect data can also bias a dataset. For example, if you give people only a short time to answer questions, their responses will be rushed. When we're rushed, we make more mistakes, which can affect the quality of our data and create biased outcomes. As a data analyst, you have to think about bias and fairness from the moment you start collecting data to the time you present your conclusions. After all, those conclusions can have serious implications. Think about this. It's been acknowledged that clinical studies of heart health tend to include a lot more men than women. This has led to women failing to recognize symptoms and ultimately having their heart conditions go undetected and untreated. That's just one way bias can have a very real impact. While we've come a long way in recognizing bias, it's still led to you losing out to the judge's niece at that science competition. And it's still influencing business decisions, healthcare choices and access, governmental action, and more. So we've still got work to do. Coming up, we'll show you how to identify bias in the data itself and explore some scenarios when you may actually benefit from it. So far, we've learned that the biases we have as people can end up creating biased data. We're biased when we have preferences based on our own preconceived or even subconscious notions. When data is biased, it can systematically skew results in certain direction, making them unreliable. We covered this earlier using sampling bias as an example. Sampling bias is when a sample isn't representative of the population as a whole. You can avoid this by making sure the sample is chosen at random so that all parts of the population have an equal chance of being chosen. If you don't use random sampling during data collection, you end up favoring one outcome. Here's a simple way to look at it. Let's say there's 50 students in one class, and you want to know if the majority prefers warm weather or cold weather. You decide to survey 10 female students and determine that the class prefers warm weather. But wait, there's some bias here. Your survey wasn't a fair representation of the entire class because it didn't include males and non-binary students. If you'd used a more randomized sample of the population that included all genders, you'd have an unbiased sample. Unbiased sampling is a sample that's representative of the population being measured. Another great way to discover if you're working with unbiased data is to bring the results to life with visualizations. In the class example we just covered, you could visualize the number of male and female students in the class overall with a bar chart. You could then compare that to a similar bar chart showing the number of male and female students you surveyed. This will help you easily identify any big issues with your sample. As a general rule, it's our goal as data analysts to avoid bias. But believe it or not, there are actually situations where a biased sample can come in handy. If you're trying to get more actionable data, bias can help you narrow your focus. For example, if you were trying to predict and plan a company's budget for the coming year, you'd probably check out last year's sales. You're technically using biased data because it's not taking into account other variables, but it is helping you narrow your focus. Okay, now that we know what bias looks like from a sampling perspective, let's explore some other types of bias and how to recognize them. Coming up next. I may be biased, but I think learning about the good and the bad traits of data is pretty fascinating. Next up, we'll discover that there's lots of different types of data bias besides sampling bias, which we covered earlier. As a quick refresher, sampling bias is when a sample isn't representative of the population as a whole. For example, if you're doing research on commuters and only survey people walking by on the sidewalk, you'll miss out on input from people who ride bicycles, drive, or take the subway. You need all sides of the story to avoid sampling bias. In this video, we'll explore 3 more types of data bias: observer bias, interpretation bias, and confirmation bias, and we'll learn how to avoid them. Let's start with observer bias, which is sometimes referred to as experimenter bias or research bias. Basically, it's the tendency for different people to observe things differently. You might remember earlier we learned that scientists use observations a lot in their work, like when they're looking at bacteria under a microscope to gather data. Well, 2 scientists looking into the same microscope might see different things. That's observer bias. Another time observer bias might happen is during manual blood pressure readings. Because the pressure meter is so sensitive, healthcare workers often get pretty different results. Usually, they'll just round up to the nearest whole number to compensate for the margin of error. But if doctors consistently round up or down the blood pressure readings on their patients, health conditions may be missed and any studies involving their patients wouldn't have precise and accurate data. Another common type of data bias is interpretation bias, the tendency to always interpret ambiguous situations in a positive or negative way. Here's an example. Let's say you're having lunch with a colleague when you get a voicemail from your boss asking you to call her back. You put the phone down in a huff, certain that she's angry and you're on the hot seat for something. But when you play the message for your friend, he doesn't hear anger at all. He actually thinks she sounds calm and straightforward. Interpretation bias can lead to 2 people seeing or hearing the exact same thing and interpreting it in a variety of different ways because they have different backgrounds and experiences. Your history with your boss made you interpret the call one way, while your friend interpreted it in another way because they're strangers. Add these interpretations to a data analysis, and you can get biased results. The last type of bias we'll cover reminds me of the saying, people see what they want to see. That pretty much sums up confirmation bias in a nutshell. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs. Someone might be so eager to confirm a gut feeling that they only notice things that support it, ignoring all other signals. This happens all the time in everyday life. We might get our news from a certain website because the writers share our beliefs, or we socialize with people because we know that they hold similar views. After all, conflicting viewpoints might cause us to question our worldview, which can lead us to changing our whole belief system. And let's face it, change is tough, but you know what's even tougher? Doing good work when you have bad data. so it's important to keep bias out of it. The 4 types of data bias we covered, sampling bias, observer bias, interpretation bias, and confirmation bias, are all unique, but they do have one thing in common. They each affect the way we collect and make sense of the data. Unfortunately, they're also just a small sample, pun intended, of the types of bias you may encounter in your career as a data analyst. But the good news is, once you know a few, you'll find yourself constantly on guard for bias in any form. It's also important to remember that no matter what kind of data you use, all of it needs to be inspected for accuracy and trustworthiness. We'll talk more about that soon when we start exploring bad data. Bye for now. Hey, what's good? No, really. I want to know, what is good? Let me put it this way. If I asked you to name a good song, I might not like it. That's because good is subjective. What I think is good and what you think is good might be different. So what about good data sources? Are those subjective too? In some ways they are, but luckily there's some best practices to follow that'll help you measure the reliability of data sets before you use them. That's what we'll discuss in this video. I think we can all agree that we all want good data. The more high-quality data we have, the more confidence we can have in our decisions. So let's learn how we can go about finding and identifying good data sources. First things first, we need to learn how to identify them, a process I like to call ROCC. R-O-C-C-C. Okay, I just made that up, but I think acronyms are a really great way to help new information to stick in the brain. Kicking things off, R for reliable. Like a good friend, good data sources are reliable. With this kind of data, you can trust that you're getting accurate, complete, and unbiased information that's been vetted and proven fit for use. Okay, on to O. O is for original. There's a good chance you'll discover data through a second or third-party source. To make sure you're dealing with good data, be sure to validate it with the original source. Time for the first C. C is for comprehensive. The best data sources contain all critical information needed to answer the question or find the solution. Think about it like this. You wouldn't want to work for a company just because you found one great online review about it. You'd research every aspect of the organization to make sure it was the right fit. It's important to do the same for your data analysis. The next C is for current. The usefulness of data decreases as time passes. If you wanted to invite all current clients to a business event, you wouldn't use a 10-year-old client list. The same goes for data. The best data sources are current and relevant to the task at hand. The last C is for cited. If you've ever told a friend where you heard that a new movie sequel was in the works, you've cited a source. Citing makes the information you're providing more credible. So when you're choosing a data source, think about 3 things. Who created the data set? Is it part of a credible organization? And when was the data last refreshed? If you have original data from a reliable organization and it's comprehensive, current, and cited, it rocks. There's lots of places that are known for having good data. Your best bet is to go with vetted public data sets, academic papers, financial data, and governmental agency data. Now that you know how to spot the good data, which rocks, you're ready to learn about the mountain of bad data and how to avoid it. Let's get moving. Last time we met, we learned how to identify and find good data sources, a process I ended up coining ROCC. We found that if the data set is reliable, original, comprehensive, current, and cited, it rocks. Or more seriously, it's good. Hopefully, this is refreshing your memory. Now it's time to pull from what we learned about good data and apply it to today's lesson, bad data sources that don't rock. They're not reliable, original, comprehensive, current, or cited. Even worse, they could be flat out wrong or filled with human error. We'll start again with R. R is for not reliable. Bad data can't be trusted because it's inaccurate, incomplete, or biased. This could be data that has sample selection bias because it doesn't reflect the overall population, or it could be data visualizations and graphs that are just misleading. Check out these 2 bar graphs, for example. The one on the left uses a y-axis starting point of 3.14%, and the one on the right uses 0. This makes it seem like interest rates have skyrocketed over a 4-year period when they've actually remained pretty flat. Okay, on to O. O is for not original. If you can't locate the original data source and you're just relying on second or third-party information, That can signal you may need to be extra careful in understanding your data. Now, C is for not comprehensive. Bad data sources are missing important information needed to answer the question or find the solution. What's worse, they may contain human error too. The next C is for not current. Bad data sources are out of date and irrelevant. Many respected sources refresh their data regularly, giving you confidence that it's the most current info available. For example, you can always trust data.gov, which is home to the US government's open data. The last C is for not cited. If your source hasn't been cited or vetted, it's a no-go. So to sum up, good data should be original data from a reliable organization, comprehensive, current, and cited. It should rock. Otherwise, it's bad data. If you need a great, reliable data source, check out the US Census Bureau, which regularly updates their information. It's important for data analysts to understand and keep an eye out for bad data because it can have serious and lasting impacts. Whether it's an incorrect conclusion leading to one bad business decision, or inaccurate information causing processes to fail and putting populations at risk, every good solution is found by avoiding bad data. For good data, stick with vetted public data sets, academic papers, financial data, and governmental agency data. And with that, we've come to the end of our adventure with bias and credibility. After a few more exercises, you'll be ready for what lies ahead. I look forward to your progress. Let me ask you something. What comes to your mind when you think of the word ethics? For me, it's a set of principles to live by. Most people have a personal code of ethics that helps them navigate the world. When we're young, it could be as simple as never lie, cheat, or steal. But as we get older, it's a much broader list of do's and don'ts. Our personal ethics evolve and become more rational, giving us a sort of moral compass to use as we face life's questions, challenges, and opportunities. When we analyze data, we're also faced with questions, challenges, and opportunities. But we have to rely on more than just our personal code of ethics to address them. As we learned earlier, we all have our own personal biases, not to mention subconscious biases that make ethics even more difficult to navigate. That's why we have data ethics, an important aspect of analytics that we'll explore right here in this video. But first, let's go back to the general idea of ethics. While an exact definition is still under discussion in philosophy, one practical view is that ethics refers to well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. And just like humans, data has standards to live up to as well. Data ethics refers to well-founded standards of right and wrong that dictate how data is collected, shared, and used. Since the ability to collect, share, and use data in such large quantities is relatively new, the rules that regulate and govern the process are still evolving. The importance of data privacy has been recognized by governments worldwide, and they've started creating data protection legislation to help protect people and their data. The GDPR of the European Union was created to do just this. While policymakers continue their work, companies like Google have a responsibility to lead the effort, and will do so in the same spirit we always have, by offering products that make privacy a reality for everyone. The concept of data ethics and issues related to transparency and privacy are a part of the process. Data ethics tries to get to the root of the accountability companies have in protecting and responsibly using the data they collect. There are lots of different aspects of data ethics, but we'll cover 6 in this video: ownership, transaction transparency, consent, currency, privacy, and openness. We'll explore data privacy and openness a bit later, but for now, let's take a closer look at the first 3. I could probably spend hours speaking about each, but this video is all about the basics, so we'll keep it brief. First up is ownership. This answers the question, who owns data? It isn't the organization that invested time and money collecting, storing, processing, and analyzing it. It's individuals who own the raw data they provide, and they have primary control over its usage, how it's processed, and how it's shared. Next, we have transaction transparency, which is the idea that all data processing activities and algorithms should be completely explainable and understood by the individual who provides their data. This is in response to concerns over data bias, which we discussed earlier is a type of error that systematically skews results in a certain direction. Biased outcomes can lead to negative consequences, so to avoid them, it's helpful to provide transparent analysis, especially to the people who shared their data. This lets people judge whether the outcome was fair and unbiased and allows them to raise potential concerns. Now let's talk about another aspect of data ethics: consent. This is an individual's right to know explicit details about how and why their data will be used before agreeing to provide it. They should know answers to questions like, why is the data being collected? How will it be used? How long will it be stored? The best way to give consent is probably a conversation between the person providing the data and the person requesting it. But with so much activity happening online these days, consent usually just looks like a terms and conditions checkbox with links to more details. Let's face it, not everyone clicks through to read those details. Consent is important because it prevents all populations from being unfairly targeted, which is a very big deal for marginalized groups who are often disproportionately misrepresented by biased data. Next, there's currency. Individuals should be aware of financial transactions resulting from the use of their personal data and the scale of these transactions. So if your data is helping to fund a company's efforts, you should know what those efforts are all about and be given the opportunity to opt out. The last two aspects of data ethics, privacy and openness, deserve their own spotlight on this data stage. Coming up, you'll see why. We've been exploring some important aspects of data ethics, and one of the most personal areas involves privacy. Privacy is personal. We may all define privacy in our own way, and we're all entitled to it. Whether it's family members wanting privacy when using a shared computer, a teenager wanting to share a selfie with only specific people, or a company wanting to keep their customers' credit card info secure, we're all concerned how our data is used and shared. Data privacy is big in today's culture, so let's explore it fully. When talking about data, privacy means preserving a data subject's information and activity anytime a data transaction occurs. This is sometimes called information privacy or data protection. It's all about access, use, and collection of data. It also covers a person's legal right to their data. This means someone like you or me should have protection from unauthorized access to our private data, freedom from inappropriate use of our data, the right to inspect, update, or correct our data, ability to give consent to use our data, and legal right to access our data. For companies, it means putting privacy measures in place to protect the individual's data. Data privacy is important, even if you're not someone who thinks about it on a day-to-day basis. The importance of data privacy has been recognized by governments worldwide, and they've started creating data protection legislation to help protect people and their data. Being able to trust companies with your data is important. It's what makes people want to use a company's product, share their information, and more. Trust is a really big responsibility that can't be taken lightly. The final aspect involving data ethics is one that's constantly being discussed: the idea of openness, free access, usage, and sharing of data. We'll cover that in another video. You're well on your way to becoming an ethical data analyst. Ready to get back into it? Great. There's just something so liberating about being able to find information on any subject at all on the internet. Can't remember the third line of your favorite childhood song? Curious who had the most home runs in 1986? Want to teach yourself sign language? Just pop open your laptop, type up some text, and poof, you have what you need. Many groups think we should also have this level of access to data. There's even a global movement that believes the openness of data can transform society and how decisions are made. So far, we've talked a lot about the power of data and the importance of data ethics concerns, including ownership, transaction transparency, consent, currency, and privacy. Now, let's talk about openness. When referring to data, openness refers to free access, usage, and sharing of data. Sometimes we refer to this as open data, but it doesn't mean we ignore the other aspects of data ethics we covered. We should still be transparent, respect privacy, and make sure we have consent for data that's owned by others. This just means we can access, use, and share that data if it meets these high standards. For example, there are standards around availability and access. Open data must be available as a whole, preferably by downloading over the internet in a convenient and modifiable form. The website data.gov is a great example of this. You can download science and research data for a wide range of industries in simple file formats like a spreadsheet. Another standard surrounds reuse and redistribution. Open data must be provided under terms that allow reuse and redistribution, including the ability to use it with other datasets. And the last area is universal participation. Everyone must be able to use, reuse, and redistribute the data. There shouldn't be any discrimination against fields, persons, or groups. No one can place restrictions on the data, like making it only available for use in a specific industry. Now let's talk a little more about why open data is such a great thing and how it can help you as a data analyst. One of the biggest benefits of open data is that credible databases can be used more widely. More importantly, all of that good data can be leveraged, shared, and combined with other data. Just imagine the impact that would have on scientific collaboration, research advances, analytical capacity, and decision-making. For example, in human health, openness allows us to access and combine diverse data to detect diseases earlier and earlier. In government, it can help hold leaders accountable and provide better access to community services. The possibilities and the benefits are almost endless. But of course, every big idea has its challenges. A whole lot of resources are needed to make the technological shift to open data. Interoperability is key to open data's success. Companies have to cooperate and work together to make data useful. Databases must be accessible with common formats and terminology. And then there's the bigger cultural shift that needs to happen, where we stop seeing databases as restricted intellectual property and start looking at them as a common good. While there's serious potential in the open, timely, fair, and simple sharing of data, its future will depend on how effectively these challenges are addressed. As a data analyst, I say the sooner the better. Speaking of which, we're going to talk more about open data and see its use in action in an upcoming video. Now that you've learned all about data ethics, you have some very important principles to guide you on your data journey. Anytime you're not sure of your data, remember what you've learned here. Happy trails.
Congratulations on finishing this video from the Google Data Analytics Certificate. Access the full experience, including job search help, and start to earn the official certificate by clicking the icon or the link in the description. Watch the next video in the course by clicking here, and subscribe to our channel for more from upcoming Google Career certificates.